Well, here we are once again, another week in lockdown. Yeah, I'm pretty sure, like everyone else, I've already climbed the walls, and there's only so many times you can do that, unfortunately. Um, but there you go. And one of the good things about this is it's showing something that we've talked about on this channel before: how incompetent the Tories are at leadership in general. Anyone who is surprised by the fact that Boris Johnson is a complete incompetent leader, especially after the revelations that just keep on coming out about his leadership, the fact that he didn't turn up to 5 Cobra meetings, like the top crisis decision body, and the man in charge of running this country is not even at them. Now, it was ridiculed a lot by the right wing press, but we have to ask a serious question. When Boris Johnson was ill in hospital, who was actually running the country? Many people are going to say, oh, it was Matt Hancock or Sajid Javid. They didn't really seem to offer any form of leadership at all during that brief moment where he was out of action. But still, they cannot be surprised by Boris's absolutely incompetentness. We've said it before. All he is a really good after dinner speaker who takes credit for other people's ideas. You've only got to look at his record back when he was mayor of London. He had nothing to do with the Olympics. He just gave a speech after it had finished. And look at his record when he was mayor. Everyone said he did nothing, and took credit for things that everyone else did. This isn't really a surprise. He's a completely incompetent man, and the fact that he's now being described as a wannabe Winston Churchill, who is who's really a Neville Chamberlain, is absolutely fantastic, because this is the guy who he has always aspired to be. And one of probably the most famous quotes from Winston Churchill is, in a crisis, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing you can do is the wrong thing. And the worst thing you can do is nothing. So, all in a crisis, always act. And I'm pretty sure I've butchered it, but it's something like along those lines. Boris Johnson just hasn't acted at all. And it's absolutely fascinating. And we are seeing the results of what happens when you elect people who are more ideologically driven, rather than basing what they're going to do on facts and evidence. And this is increasingly becoming clear with Brexit. And we're going to cover, not in this video, but another video, Boris's speech he did about how Brexit Britain was going to take advantage of all this. But first, we have to cover not just Boris, but the entire Conservative front bench. And Phillip Pullman has come out recently and said this, and I completely agree. He said the entire front bench should resign if they put Brexit before saving lives during the coronavirus pandemic. And more, it has become very, very clear that they are putting Brexit and their ideology ahead of actually saving people's lives. More and more, there is an increasing call to extend the transition period. Will they do it? We don't know. But I'll tell you now, if we go out on a no deal, our Brexit was already going to be, cutting our hand off to spite our face. Cutting our nose off to spite our face. Sorry. But yeah, the disaster that is going to be a no-deal Brexit, which, by the looks of it, this is what they wanted from the very beginning. So all their talk during the referendum and afterwards of trying to get a deal was just complete hokum. So they're not even trying to honour what they promised at the referendum. So who's really honouring the will of the people at that point? So on to what Philip Pullman has said. So his best-selling His Dark Materials author used a blog post to claim that Boris Johnson should be arraigned on charges for conspiracy to murder if it is found that he has prevented the government from joining EU schemes to bulk buy equipment for ideological reasons. That could potentially happen, and there is good cause for that to happen, because if it was based on ideological reasons, might be hard to prove, but I think it will definitely be worth the case hearing, and I think holding Boris to account, especially when we see growing calls for a public inquiry, are already happening. There are petitions out there, so I urge you, go and sign the petitions. Go and sign the petitions to extend the transition period. Get behind those calls to do that, because it is going to, look, that inquiry will uncover even more stuff. And if anything that the Tories are known for, it's good for burying inquiries. Hence why it has to be a public inquiry. So, in reference to admission that the UK did not participate in the bulk buying of the personal protective equipment schemes, Pullman wrote, "If it turns out to be true that the government, for Brexit-related reasons, refused to take part in the procurement advantage offered by EU governments, thus making it harder for the NHS to deal with the COVID-19 and placing thousands of people at risk, the entire front bench ought to resign." He has added that he did not expect ministers should resign, that they should instead be taken to court. He continues, "But of course they won't. They have not had a single grain of shame, so they should be arraigned on charges of conspiracy to murder. Nothing less will do. They knew the risks and thought that they'd rather appease the frothing zealots of Brexit." Pullman has said that there needs to be big reforms in politics at the end of the outbreaks, passionately claiming it's all got to change. And I agree, we do really need a massive change in politics. I think one of the biggest things we can get, biggest changes we can do, is get rid of first past the post and bring in absolute true representative democracy based on the percentage of the vote that parties win. That is how I think we need to progress, because that will truly bring in dynamic change into this country. So anyway, Pullman continues, "If we come out of this crisis with all the rickety, fly-blown, worm-eaten old structures still intact, the same vain, idolent public schoolboys in charge, the same hedge fund managers stuffing their overloaded pockets with greasy fingers, our descendants will not forgive us." He then called to a halt to Brexit itself too, echoing claims of Remainer campaigners could turn their attention to a second referendum after the pandemic. He said, "There are so many clear advantages to being in the EU, and the benefits of leaving are so tenuous and fanciful that we must revisit the referendum and hope this time the Labour Party under a new leader will play a proper part in the argument, and that the lies, the cheating, the fraudulent and shameless rhetoric will be fully exposed by a strong, passionate and focused campaign to remain." Minister Therese Coffey previously claimed a PPE bulk buying scheme from the EU would have been inadequate, despite delivering the 1.3 billion worth of equipment to 25 countries in the coming days. A Downing Street spokesperson echoed the view about such initiatives. They said that the EU schemes that participating in this scheme would not have allowed us to do anything, and that we could have not been able to do ourselves. And yet, they themselves are failing to deliver this stuff. It's just come out very recently that this delivery we got from Turkey was only asked for days ago. And yet, here we have 1.3 billions worth of equipment to 25 different countries. That will make a difference. And yet we did not participate in it because of ideological reasons. That equipment can save people's lives. Pullman is no stranger to criticisms of the Tory government after calling Matt Hancock and ministers a bunch of crooks after there were fears elements of the NHS could be sold in a post-Brexit trade deal. There you have it, essentially. Yeah, I completely agree with Pullman. After this, there really, really needs to be a serious movement for political change in this country. I think one of the things that definitely needs to happen is a change to first past the post. That will see serious change in this country. We need to get rid of it, and then we need to bring in true proportional representation. That will change.